Hello folks, and welcome to the channel. My name is Arseni, and this is going to be my look at the domains of Ravenloft. Before I begin, a little bit about me and where I'm coming from in respect to this material. I've been a DM or a GM for over 25 years now, playing a variety of different systems, although Dungeons & Dragons has been my go-to system for a couple of editions now. I've started with 2nd edition AD&D. I've played through a lot of 3rd edition, 3.5, Pathfinder, a bit of 4th edition, and I've actually been a professional DM for 5th edition, meaning that I run paid games online for some time now. And one of my favorite settings in D&D has always been Ravenloft. I'm a big fan of horror, and especially horror RPGs and horror literature. And this led me to eventually discover Ravenloft, and of course, as soon as I realized that there is a horror setting for Dungeons & Dragons, I was incredibly excited. So when I found out that finally, after many years, because there was no Ravenloft really in 4th edition, so it kind of skipped a whole generation of D&D players, that there will finally be a Ravenloft book for 5th edition. I was incredibly excited. Of course, by then we already had Curse of Strahd that I ran, and that remains one of my favorite modules, one of my favorite published adventures, and one of the best published campaigns that I've ever run in my long career life as a DM. And so when I heard that Ravenloft will come out as its own setting, I was incredibly excited. Excited enough that I, of course, had to go to my local friendly gaming store and pick up this beautiful alternate cover. Yeah. This is not going to be a review, however, of this entire book. Instead, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to look specifically at the domains in Ravenloft, what they are, how a dungeon master can use these domains in their game, and the relative strengths and weaknesses of the tools for dungeon masters that are presented in each domain. I'm also going to do a bit of a comparison with the older Ravenloft, specifically the this is the 3rd edition Ravenloft. And I actually happen to have all of my 3rd edition Ravenloft books, which I have all of them, all the ones that were published at any rate, as well as some of the 2nd edition Ravenloft books as well. I don't actually have an official, the original rather, Castle Ravenloft adventure, which I'm a little sad about. I'd love to get my hands on it one day, although I hear that the print-on-demand version is very, very good. Okay, so first of all, what is Ravenloft? Ravenloft is a setting. It is a horror setting for Dungeons & Dragons, and as a setting, it is comprised of different domains, and domains in Ravenloft are kind of like islands caught in the mists. So there are these mysterious mists, and these mists may abduct people from, such as adventurers, from other settings, from Forgotten Realms, Eberron, Greyhawk, you name it, Dark Sun, even, like all over, and bring them into these domains and trap them in these domains. And each domain has its own unique themes. Some domains have a very Victorian England theme to them. Others might have kind of like medieval Transylvania or bizarre steampunk universe kind of thing. And each domain is actually its own mini setting. And some of these domains can actually be big enough, as we're going to see, to warrant a full campaign. And that means that there's a tremendous variety in what kind of horror adventure you want to run in Ravenloft, because there, as we're going to see, there's going to be a domain for every genre of horror you can think of, and maybe some that you haven't thought of before. Each domain, and this is also important to understand, is also home to a Dark Lord. A Dark Lord is a person. Sometimes it's more of a creature or a cursed artifact or weirder entities that we're going to look at, who are trapped in this domain and they are being tormented by this domain. So they're at once the masters of the domain, but at the same time they are prisoners of it, and they are tormented by these mysterious dark powers. And that means that every domain already comes built in with a villain that the players may or may not actually confront. Maybe their objective is actually just to escape the domain. Maybe their objective is to actually confront this Dark Lord, or maybe they're in the domain, but they're actually having completely unrelated adventure, and the Dark Lord is never going to make an appearance. So how you use these Dark Lords is entirely up to you as a dungeon master. But I'm going to talk about them anyway, because each domain is fundamentally structured around the Dark Lord, okay, around the weaknesses, curses, and the evil actions that this Dark Lord had committed in their life. So that is what the domains are. And what I'm going to be doing in the series of videos is that I'm going to be looking at 5 domains in each video. And in each domain, I'm going to talk about what is this domain about, who is its Dark Lord, what are its genres, what is its atmosphere and feel. Okay, so like, what are you aiming for, or like what are you getting from this domain and from this book. And we'll also discuss Dungeon Master tools, because each domain in this book comes with a lot of random tables and some other tools that DMs can use for their campaign or adventure set in Ravenloft. Okay, so those are the things we're going to look at. And today in this video, we're going to look at the first 5 domains in this book. And actually, this is kind of a bit of off topic, but while doing my research and while I went back to the 3rd edition and 2nd edition Ravenloft, I found that 3rd edition Ravenloft book is actually terribly organized, and that organization and layout has come a very long way since those days, at least as far as D&D products are concerned. And so this book, for example, is organized much better and is focused a lot more on helping dungeon masters. Whereas this book, for example, which is fantastic, it's a fantastic book, there's a ton of really good stuff in it, it doesn't really help, when it comes to the individual domains, it doesn't really help the dungeon master very much. There's a lot of other good stuff in there though, but that's a whole different topic. So with that in mind, let us talk about the first and the most iconic domain, and iconic is the word that is that can absolutely be applied 100% to this domain, and that is the domain of Barovia. So why is Barovia such an iconic domain? Well, the reason for that is because without Barovia, there would be no Ravenloft, right? Before there was Ravenloft as a setting, there was this grand adventure, right? Castle Ravenloft, where players would get sucked into this tiny, mist-shrouded village and surrounding area of Barovia, and of course the great castle Ravenloft that is looming over this tiny, hapless, besieged village. And this adventure proved to be so popular that the setting grew around the domain of Barovia, and in fact the domain itself got greatly expanded, because at the beginning we only had this one tiny village called Barovia, and then it expanded from there into more of a full-fledged land. And you can actually see its map. Right? So this is a bit of a bigger domain, right? Barovia is There's the gates of Barovia, right? There's the village of Barovia, and the castle Ravenloft is over here. And then there's this other big area that's full of all kinds of neat stuff. Barovia is also iconic, especially for 5th edition players, because it is the setting of Curse of Strahd, right? There he is. And so anyone who has played or run this module is going to be very familiar with Barovia. So with that in mind, kind of have to ask a question. Why do we need this domain to be detailed in this book when it is so much more detailed in Curse of Strahd? Because in Curse of Strahd, every single location, on this map plus other locations get outlined in great detail. Whereas in this book, it's really much shorter. But I think that this book does provide something new for anyone who has already run Curse of Strahd, or anyone who might run Curse of Strahd, or even just wants to run an adventure in this domain. So, with that in mind, this is why this domain is so iconic. With that in mind, let's talk a little bit about it. So, its Dark Lord is predictably Strahd von Zarovich. Count Strahd von Zarovich is the first vampire. And of course, there are very, very obvious parallels between him and Count Dracula of Bram Stoker's Dracula, not the historical Dracula. And this whole plot between Strahd von Zarovich and his long lost love, or rather the woman he loves but who doesn't love him back, long story, that really forms the whole core of both the adventure modules as well as this domain. And Count Strahd von Zarovich is a very strong villain, not just in terms of his stat block, which is quite impressive, but in terms of who he is as a villain. He is a charming, ruthless, terrifying, manipulative, and always present villain. He's a very active villain, and he's absolutely going to terrify your players if you play him right. And I know my players were pretty terrified of Count Strahd when every chance every time he appeared, they were properly terrified of him because they knew how much he outmatched them. So both in terms of his mechanical stats, but also in terms of kind of who he is as a villain, this is a great villain, and it's a very classic villain. He's not a very subtle villain, to be honest, but he works very well. He's a vampire lord, and he's got all these cool powers and a lot of minions, and he's got this suitably tragic and dark story. In terms of genres, so this book recommends that the most suitable genre to Barovia is Gothic horror. And yeah, because it is based on Bram Stoker's Dracula, you could also look even at much earlier Gothic literature like Castle Otranto, and some of Lord Byron's poems, and such. You can see very clear influences that are in this domain. So yeah, in terms of genre, sure, Gothic horror is perfectly appropriate, and you could play a pretty good Gothic horror campaign if you wanted to. However, you could also run dark fantasy in it very, very well, and in fact, I would even argue that Curse of Strahd, the module, the very popular module set in Barovia, is actually not Gothic horror. It's really more of a dark fantasy horror than it is of Gothic horror, in my opinion, only anyway. So I think you could run Gothic horror, you could run dark fantasy. You could even run psychological horror, depending on the locations. For example, some of the locations in this domain, for example, the Abbey at Kresk, for instance, would be very suitable to psychological horror, for example, or the old Bone Grinder here would be very suitable to body horror. So you can actually do quite a lot with this domain. You don't have to run it just as a Gothic horror domain. Its atmosphere and feel, you're basically getting Transylvania, right? You're basically getting if you look at it, right, it's the land beyond the forest, the land between the great mountains, right? And you got two mountain in the north, mountain in the south, right? You're basically getting Transylvania, but with a D&D fantasy feel to it, right? So howling wolves, swarms of bats, very dark forests, wandering Vistani caravans, ancient ruins, suspicious illiterate peasants, all that awesome kind of gothic horror feel with a kind of it's very much Eastern Europe or Southern Europe feel to it. So quite you know what you're getting. Now, I wanted to talk also about there's some Strad von Zarovich. The art in this book is fantastic, but it might not be everyone's cup of tea. For example, Count Strad von Zarovich has gone through many different transformations visually, for example, from second edition all the way to this, for example, where he looks a little bit more like a generic vampire, in my opinion. Still a cool picture, just maybe a little bit more generic. And by the way, here's some information that you get on what are Strahd's powers as a Dark Lord, what are his torments, how is he being tormented, and how should you roleplay him. And honestly, this is okay. The actual Curse of Strahd provides more information on how to properly run Strahd. Now, the tools, I think, are some of the best GM tools in this book, because what this book does, essentially, is it lets the DM tweak Curse of Strahd in many interesting ways. Yeah, you've got this pretty nice table, Barovia Adventures, if you want to just kind of create one-shot adventures set in Barovia that are not in Curse of Strahd. Here you go. Here's some ideas. But you're definitely going to need Curse of Strahd. I think some of these locations, like for example, Argynvostholt or Wizard of Wine, for example, these locations are detailed very well in Curse of Strahd. So this is not actually the best GM tool, but this could be really good to add as side quests to a Curse of Strahd campaign or as a one-shot adventure. Where it gets much better is here, and that is the different incarnations of Tatiana, connections to Strahd. What if you don't want Strahd to be the villain? What if your players, they expect that Strahd von Zarovich is going to be the villain, but actually it's going to be Irina, who's Tatiana's latest incarnation? Or what if Tatiana's incarnation was not reincarnated as Irina Kalyana, as it says in the module Curse of Strahd? What if instead she's actually Esmeralda or Es Davenir, the vampire slayer and protege of Rudolf van Richten? That's cool, right? That really changes module. Or what if Tatiana has been reincarnated as identical twins, right? Or instead of being reincarnated as a woman, it's actually a teenage boy, right? That really changes the story, and that really changes the feel. And other tables are also fantastic. For example, how do you connect the players and other NPCs to Strahd? How do you conceal? How is the incarnation being concealed? Again, so you can take these tables, or for example, hunting Strahd, right? Or what if Tatiana, what if the incarnation of Strahd's lost love, what if she's not even Barovia? What if she's in another domain? And now Strahd is sending his agents into other domains to find her. That could be a really cool campaign, and that could be a really cool twist on the Curse of Strahd. Or even running your entirely different campaign where your players travel from domain to domain, foiling the agents of Count Strahd as they're searching for Tatiana's reincarnation, right? So very, very cool stuff. Very good tools, because you can use them for Curse of Strahd, or you can use them to create a whole different campaign. And I think it's great. Moving on to the next domain, and that is going to be the domain of Bluetspur. I hope I pronounced it correctly. For a while, I was pronouncing it Bluetspur, and then I was like, no, it's probably pronounced Bluetspur. I don't know. You decide how you want to pronounce it. And Bluetspur is the domain of Cosmic Core. This is another domain that has been around for a while. This domain has appeared in 2nd edition. This domain has appeared in 3rd edition. It might not be quite as iconic or well known as Barovia, but I think it's a fantastic domain. And basically, what you're getting here is Cosmic Core. You're getting that kind of Lovecraftian or even some of Wes Craven's stories or China Miéville's stories or other kind of cosmic horror writers. So you're getting a domain with the focus is on unimaginable alien entities warping reality and your perceptions of reality and even your very identity as a person. And this domain has not changed very much, which is both its strength and its weakness, in my opinion. So, for starters, its Dark Lord is the God Brain of Bluetspur, and the God Brain is basically, it's an Illithid God Brain, right? So it's a Mind Flayer God Brain, which has actually been exiled and cast out by other Illithid God Brains. Sorry, not God Brains, but other Elder Brains. Sorry. And I think that's pretty fun. That's a pretty good twist. The Dark Lord here isn't an entity, isn't like a single Mind Flayer. No, it's an actual Elder Brain that is controlling an entire hive of Mind Flayers and Intellect Devourers and Vampiric Mind Flayers. And basically, if you looked into, Mordekainen's, and Mordekainen's of Volos, right? And there's like a ton of Mind Flayer themed stuff. I think it's Volos, actually. This is where you could put all that stuff. You could put all those Mind Flayer themed monsters, Ulithorids, like you name it. This is a great place for it. And this domain is fantastic because I think you can take this domain and you can drop it into any other campaign you have. It doesn't have to be a Ravenloft campaign. Like if you want a realm where, I don't know, Mind Flayers are coming from, or if you want this twisted wasteland in your setting where no one returns from, kind of like the Mountains of Madness, right? This is perfect. Just take Bluetspur, drop it right in there, boom, instant success. Genres, it recommends cosmic horror, right? So it's kind of like Lovecraftian horror, but you could easily do psychological horror, which is actually something that is suggested in the text of this domain, but doesn't say here, which is okay. And I don't know why not. It's not like they couldn't add 2 words. So psychological horror and body horror, because these Mind Flayers are going to perform all kinds of awful experiments on not just your mind, but also on your body. And, you can do a lot of neat things with this domain. You pretty much know what you're getting. You're getting like giant megalithic ruins. You're getting twisted laboratories, pens where intelligent beings are being bred as livestock, and all kinds of other horrific things. And yeah, like honestly, this was one of the domains where I read it and I was instantly inspired and repulsed. And like, just look at this art. I love this art, right? Like a person who is remembering their time in Bluetspur. One of the things that these Mind Flayers do, by the way, they don't always just like eat the brains of whoever wanders into this domain. Sometimes they'll just kind of like experiment on them, wipe their memories, and then just kind of boop, back you go. So it's kind of very alien abduction feel in fantasy, and I think that's terrific. And the DM tools in this domain really do a good job of supporting that. Now, one thing about this domain is that it doesn't really have a map because it's just this vast wasteland, like literally a wasteland where nothing lives, and underneath it, right, like the land surface is a lethal alien place scattered with the ruins of long extinct civilizations. Love it. There's a massive mountain, massive beyond all words, like, ooh, crazy, right? And that mountain pulses with a soundless pulse. Like, that's awesome. I love the imagery in this domain. And then underneath, like, is actually where the Mind Flayers live. But there are no settlements, no sites, and there's no map. I don't think it really needs a map per se. It does go quite into detail about the God brain and what it is and what it wants, and how is it getting it. But, and this is a bit of a weakness of this domain in my opinion, and that is you're not going to run an entire campaign in it. You could run a series of adventures, a sort of like Out of the Abyss. You wake up in the laboratory and now you're trying to escape, and it's going to be like, okay, you need to do this, then you need to do this, and you need to do this, and then you're going to escape Bluetspur. And I think that would be fantastic. And it's great. It's just not going to support a long campaign very well. It could, however, work very well as a culmination to a longer campaign. Like your final adventure could be like you're going to go into Bluetspur and you're going to confront, the God Brain or some twisted Mind Flare Arcanist or something like that. It also works very well as a one-shot or like a side adventure where your players get sucked into this. Or, and this is something suggested in this chapter, or you run a flashback section where your characters have these horrible dreams and nightmares, and they actually play through Bluetspur, and then they wake up, and then they realize those weren't dreams, they were actually memories, and that they've all been, at some point in their lives, they've all been abducted by these mind flayers, experimented on, and released. Right? And so then you can really play into the psychological horror, like what is even real? What do they do to us? Am I really who I think I am, or am I creation of these mind flare monstrosities? And I think that could be really, really interesting. That would be really cool. DM tools are very good. You've got seeds for adventures, so you've got a bunch of pretty cool adventures. Here you go, like, you've got like a kind of like body snatcher adventure. You've got like almost, almost a kind of a Men in Black adventure, like you're investigating an alien crash. Ooh, there's a classic, like you go into the Underdark, and in the Underdark, you accidentally enter into Bluetspur. So it's good ideas. What I like is this, okay, and this is what I was talking about. This is about return to Bluetspur. It's the whole idea that your characters actually came from here, they've been here before, and now they're just starting to realize that. And they have this aberrant evidence, lost or suppressed memories. That's pretty great, and I wish there was more of it. I think the tools that are here are good. They gave me a lot of ideas. I just think that there could be a little bit more of them. Next, we're going to look at Borca. And its name is not terribly evocative. Like, to me, it kind of sounds like a Swedish chef. Bork. But, yeah, mileage may vary. Borca is another iconic domain. It did not get created at the same time as Barovia, for example, but it's actually closely connected to Barovia because one of the important people in this domain actually is a descendant of somebody who ran away from Barovia. Was actually a treacherous noble who betrayed Count Strad von Zarovich and then fled and ended up in this domain, which is kind of a neat connection to Barovia. Now, in terms of the domains, I find after refreshing my memory and reading through the 3rd edition version of Borca, this domain has not changed very much. Its map has changed, some of its descriptions have changed, but in its most basic things, it hasn't really changed all that much. So what is Borca about? Well, Borca is a very large domain, actually. It's got quite a few towns and villages and different sites, and it's not as tiny as some of the other domains. But it's a domain that is ruled by 2 Dark Lords, Ivana Boritsi and Ivan Delisnia, just like it wasn't before. Except here, these Dark Lords have changed a bit. So this is one of those domains, few domains, where you actually don't have one Dark Lord. You actually have more than one, and they're, of course, struggling for power. And this domain, is really all about gothic horror and psychological horror. But I actually think this is a bit of a misnomer, because what this domain is really about, it's really about political intrigue, as presented in the book. Now, I think that this domain could do a really good job with folk horror, so kind of like, dark fairy tales or like, twisted folk cults and stuff. Think like Midsummer or Wicker Man, for example. Especially as the actual description of the domain describes it. You could do more than just gothic or psychological horror. But quite frankly, the way it's presented here, I don't know. I don't really buy the psychological horror very much. It's a little bit there, but I wasn't quite persuaded. What is this domain? So you got these two Dark Lords, Ivana Boritsi, Ivan Delisnia. They hate each other, but they can't they plot against each other, but they can't get rid of each other really, because they're trapped in this domain and they torment each other because of something that happened when they were both much younger. And there is a pretty nice kind of story behind who these terrible people are and what they want, and why are they, intriguing against each other. The problem is, in my opinion, is that I don't know if all players are going to be equally invested in these people and who they are and what they want and why they're involving the players in their intrigues. As far as the domain itself is concerned, this is basically a domain where you're going to be running, at least by default, very political, very politics heavy game, right? It just says here like it's political intrigue. So there's a bunch of noble families. All of these noble families basically hate each other. They can't stand each other, and they're all intriguing against each other for power, prestige, status, or just because they're jaded and bored. And I think that's pretty cool. I like games that have like political intrigue and things like that. The problem I have is that, at least as written in this book, it doesn't sound all that horrific. In fact, most of Borca sounds like pretty generic fantasy land, maybe a bit grittier than some fantasy settings, but it's basically kind of appears almost like a generic fantasy with a bunch of squabbling noble houses. It's fine. I think you could use it as a setting for a pretty fun political campaign. As a domain of horror, I wasn't totally convinced. But I think you could do stuff with this domain. It's just not exactly what the book presents it as, if that makes sense. So yeah, you got powerful families, which is, by the way, this is a change in the previous editions. Really, these two families, the Boritsi family and the Delisnia family, were really the only families. In this edition, they've kind of like, no, there's actually a bunch of noble families, and I think it's a good change. I think it's more interesting. You could do a pretty good urban campaign. Levkarest is the big city. Now, it isn't detailed very well in this book, but if you can find 3rd edition Ravenloft books, you can get more information about Borca there. Beautiful maps. In fact, I love the maps in this book. All the maps are just so evocative. I absolutely love all of them. Some of them could be just a little bit more clear, or like maybe have some sites labeled better, but that's a whole different topic. Anyway, on to the so you got these different noble families. They all have their very evocative names. Some are very kind of Polish, even Russian, like Pichota, right? Pichota is a very Polish name, but also it's a Russian word, for example, right? You got German inspiration, Polish inspiration, Russian inspiration, right? And they all have these very evocative estate names: Misericordia, Alieselti, and so on. I love that. It's pretty good. The problem I have with this domain is that its two Dark Lords are not particularly interesting. You've got Ivana Boritsi, who is by far the more interesting of the two. And she is actually dubbed the Black Widow, or the Poisoner of Borca. And she's basically this powerful, scheming, noble woman with many minions and incredible powers of seduction and manipulation, and of course poisoning. It's a bit of a trope, and I'm sure that there might be some DMs and players who might be uncomfortable with the tropes that Ivana is playing into. Your mileage may vary, you know, like this whole like, oh, she's a Black Widow who you know, whose heart was broken by her mother, and so she killed her entire family. Yeah. On the other hand, that does make her I think between the two of them, she's a more compelling villain. She has better motivations for what she wants and why she wants it. And you don't have to play her as a villain. You can play her as a patron. And I think that's very cool, because you can take Ivana and you can actually make her the patron. And she's going to send your player character, your player characters on errands, maybe in Borca, maybe in other domains, you know, bringing her rare herbs and mushrooms, or spying on her rivals, all kinds of stuff. So I think that could actually be pretty cool. Unfortunately, the book doesn't actually go very deeply into like, what if you want to make her a patron instead of a villain? Then you've got, you know, you've got her counterpart, Ivan Delisnia, and he has changed from basically a young serial killer to this twisted thing. And basically, Ivan Delisnia is a pretty boring villain, in my opinion. He basically he's a sadist for sadism's sake. He is a serial killer just because he's jaded and bored, and he kind of just is described as having this really annoying childish laugh, and his toys and pets, and I don't know, he could make for a pretty neat villain for a one-shot adventure. As a Dark Lord, didn't strike me as being particularly interesting. GM tools. Now the GM tools here are good. The only problem is that these tools are not particularly horror themed. These tools would be great if you're running a political campaign, because you've got pretty good political ideas for like political adventures and related explorations. You've got some tables about requests requests that might leave your PCs in debt, owing favors, to various jaded nobles, lethal leverage, and you've got these also, and you've got also this section here which explains how Ivana and Ivan, how are they scheming against each other, and how the PCs can fit into that, including like some new poisons, things like that. And that's nice, but again, it doesn't strike me as being horror. Like it doesn't quite convey like horror to me compared to many other domains. So that's Borca. Would be pretty good to kind of visit or maybe play a political intrigue as a Ravenloft domain of dread. There's nothing particularly very dreadful about it, in my opinion. All right, and next is the Carnival. So the Carnival is sort of a new addition to Ravenloft. The Carnival was mentioned as a domain in 3rd edition as well. Although it was mentioned in one of the smaller supplements, it was not in the core book, not in the 3rd edition core book, but it was mentioned in one of the supplements, and it was actually fleshed out. However, it has changed quite a lot. Okay, so like what the Carnival was in 3rd edition, what the Carnival is now, has changed quite a bit. And basically, the Carnival is what it sounds like. It is a carnival of delights that comes into town. They set up and they have all these sideshows and big tent performances, and you know what you're getting, right? Like, ooh, it's it's a kind of a creepy carnival, right? There's that awesome Ray Bradbury story, all right? Something wicked this way comes. You've got Stephen King with his with his similar spins, things like that. The twist, and if you're a player, shut your ear, cover your ears. But the twist is that it's not actually the carnival itself that's evil. The people who live and work in the carnival are just people. A lot of them are maybe a bit strange, but they're not evil themselves. What is evil is the dark fae that follow this carnival and exploit and abuse anyone, the audience who comes to the carnival. And so that's what gives the carnival its dark reputation. And I think that's really cool. I think it's a really good idea. The problem I have is that it's never really explained really well why these dark fairy creatures follow the carnival. It's just kind of like, oh, they do. It's not really linked, for example, to the Dark Lord of this domain. Speaking of Dark Lord, let's talk about the Dark Lord. The Dark Lord of this domain is another unique Dark Lord, except this time in the sense that it is not a person. It is actually a cursed intelligent item, which I think is really cool. It's a cursed intelligent sword. It's very, very powerful. It grants its yielder great powers, but it is a very, very evil. It is a very, very evil artifact that is possessed by the leader of the carnival, Isolde. And I think they have a pretty cool picture of Isolde and Nepenthe. Yeah, there you go. So there's Isolde with Nepenthe. No, Nepenthe. There's a lot of cool stuff here. Genres, right? Body horror and dark fantasy. I think even folk horror, because all these dark fae, right? There's a lot of kind of fairy tale stuff described in this domain. So you could even throw in folk horror. You can do all kinds of enter into all kinds of twisted bargains with the different fae. You can go to the sideshow and you can get involved in the lives of the people who run the carnival. So yeah, you could do body horror, you could do dark fantasy, you could do folk horror. I think it's fantastic. Overall, I really like the carnival as a domain and as is described. Its atmosphere and feel, like I said, you know what you're getting. You're getting a kind of this fun, dark carnival attraction. And I think it's fantastic because you can drop it anywhere. You don't even have to use it in Ravenloft. Just use it in any setting. Your players have a town or a village or a city they call home. Well, this carnival comes to town, and and then suddenly people start to disappear, or people start to go mad. Go investigate this carnival and discover that it's not actually the carnival. It's actually these dark fairies that are, that are tormenting the people and follow this carnival. Make for a really cool adventure. You can also put it in almost any Ravenloft domain as well, because it travels around. It doesn't stay in one place. And I think this is one of the strengths. So you can put it anywhere. Another strength with the carnival is that you could actually make your player characters members of the carnival and make the whole campaign. It could be really fun. Episodic campaign is where they travel from domain to domain, and your players are like acrobats and strongmen and stage magicians or whatever who are members of this carnival, and they're traveling around with it. And you go to a new place, you put on a show, but then your players, they get entangled in the lives of the locals, and they have to help them because of the dark fairies. I think that would be a fantastic campaign, and I think that's one of the strengths of this domain. One thing that really is that I'm not fond of in this domain is its Dark Lord. Simply put, you get all this information about Isolde. There it is. Look at this. That's a lot of information about Isolde. The problem is, Isolde is not the Dark Lord. She runs this caravan, and she does. She's the one who's currently in possession or is possessed by Nepenthe. But like all the stuff that you have here about Isolde, almost none of it really comes into play. I mean, you could like weave her backstory in. But if you're just using the caravan as like a one-shot adventure or as a side quest of some sort, you're never going to need this. Okay, like this is, you're not gonna need this. So you have all this on Isolde, right? And then you have all this on Nepenthe or Nepend, but it doesn't actually tell me what is it that Nepenthe wants. Like, it doesn't have motivation. It's just a cursed sword. Yeah, it's got a cool backstory, but it doesn't do anything. It doesn't want anything. It's just kind of like, ooh, I'm gonna possess you, and you're going to be filled with rage and the desire for revenge. All right, it's just not terribly interesting in my opinion. They could have done better. I think they could have done something more interesting. What another interesting idea, however, that is buried, like this is where it's buried, and this is a problem, and that is that Isolde is looking for a serial killing demon called the Caller. And the Caller is basically a corrupting fiend, right? They're like, you know, the devil at the crossroads who offers bargains. That's, and the Caller is a type of a, almost like a Dorian Gray like figure who is corrupted and corrupts everyone around them. And Isolde is hunting this supernatural serial killer / manipulator. And that could make for a very fun campaign as well, where you play a group of investigators who are helping Isolde hunt down the Caller. And that could be an interesting campaign. Unfortunately, it's buried here. And, you know, almost nowhere else is this mentioned again. Also, the GM tools in this domain are really lacking. This is what you're getting, right? Compare this to the previous domains we just looked at. Wow, a D4, 4 ideas for Carnival adventures. I could come up with a dozen more Carnival adventure ideas right now. You know, why not shorten a bit Nepenthe's backstory, Isolde's backstory, especially since they're not going to be all that important, probably, to your players, and expand on GM tools. I mean, the Carnival is such an interesting idea. So many neat ideas that you could do there. You know, for example, you could do random tables around the stuff like putting on a show. What if your characters are part of the Carnival? Here's a random table or two about how to put on a show and what happens. Maybe mishaps during the show. Maybe the Manticore gets loose and, you know, the audience scatters. Or maybe a dark fairy offers, you know, transforms an audience member into a twisted monstrosity, and now you have to reverse the curse. That would be cool, but it's not here. So Carnival, really interesting domain in my opinion. A lot of potential both for a one-shot adventure or campaign. Not enough DM tools. And last but not least on our list is one of my favorite domains in this book. Maybe my favorite domain. I'm not sure. There's a couple of other domains that come a close second. And that is the domain of Darkon. Darkon is another iconic domain. Darkon has been around as part of Ravenloft almost as long as Barovia has. There's really like 3 domains: Barovia, Darkon, and one other that we're going to get to in a future video, that were kind of there from the beginning, almost from the beginning of the setting. And so I was really excited to find out, what did they do with Darkon? How are they going to change it? Because Barovia is basically Barovia. It's kind of hasn't really changed all that much. Yeah, they changed some names, but Barovia in this book isn't that different from, well, not substantially different from Barovia in, you know, this book. Darkon, on the other hand, is an enormously changed domain in very, very surprising ways, and it has to do with its Dark Lord, or rather the absence of one. See, Darkon used to be a prison for this Lich King named Azalin Rex, and the ongoing big plot of Ravenloft is not really actually about Count Strahd von Zarovich. It was really, if you look at the amount of books, right, the various fiction books, Ravenloft fiction books, a lot of it was actually really about Azalin Rex and his desire to bring his son back to life and to escape the domain of dread and to literally defeat death itself. And it was fantastic. I'm not going to say that those books were really good, but they were a lot of fun. and the plot is actually really good. Now, what happens in Darkon is that Azalin escapes. Maybe. Because it's up to you as a DM, and there are tools for it down below, to decide what really happened. And this is the grand mystery of this domain. This is why this domain, I think, is one of my favorite, maybe my most favorite domain. And that is because you can do so much with this domain. You can set a campaign from level 1 to level 20, all in this domain. And it's going to be a ton of fun, in my opinion. I think I'm actually very tempted to do exactly that and run a Darkon campaign from like level 1 to maybe level 12, level 15. Because with Azalin gone, there is no Dark Lord. And because there's no Dark Lord, the domain is being slowly destroyed by the mists. It's slowly being reclaimed by these mysterious mists. And because of that, it's not just dark fantasy. Like if you're looking at genres, it's not just dark fantasy. It's disaster horror. It's apocalyptic horror. Think Dark Souls, right? Or Bloodborne. More Dark Souls, really, right? An ancient land full of grandeur and wonder and forgotten, and already like forgotten knowledge and magnificence and arcane art, but all of it has fallen into decay, and all of it is on the verge of disappearing unless you do something. Right? That's the whole premise of Dark Souls, and that's the premise of Darkon, is that it is a land that is going to be destroyed. It's going to be not just physically destroyed, it's going to be wiped from existence unless you do something about it. And another thing that I really love about it is that most of the inhabitants of Darkon either don't realize that it's happening or they don't care. So it's got that very nihilistic and desperate, both nihilistic and desperate feel to it, because the land is being swallowed up, but almost no one seems to care. And I think it could make for so many great stories. Darkon is also one of the largest domains, and the other cool thing, and this is a cool thing about it, is that you can basically put any D&D race into Darkon. In fact, the book even suggests that you can. Like, you're probably not going to have native Dragonborn in Barovia, but in Darkon, yeah, you do. You're probably not going to have native Tieflings in Mordant, but in Darkon, yeah, there's a whole community of Tieflings. Go nuts. So it's a big domain, and there's a lot of empty spaces where you can place kind of whatever you want, whatever races and backgrounds you want, or I guess they're called lineages now instead of races, right? And the interesting thing about Darkon is that a huge variety of the campaigns or adventures you can have in it. For example, just to scroll down, Darkon has not one, but 3 different people, for various definitions of people, who want to be the next Dark Lord, who want to be the next Azalin Rex, and they're all squabbling amongst each other. And you got like this, you got this vampire, you've got this Necrocore, who is like this basically undead ooze, like a wizard who got turned into this evil ooze. And you've got this scheming, conniving noblewoman who is much more than she appears. So you could have a political campaign, like which of these three terrible villains, and they're all pretty terrible, should become the next Dark Lord of Darkon. Or maybe, and this is even cooler, and this is going to be in the GM tools, or maybe your entire goal is to bring back Azalin Rex, which is pretty cool. So you can see here, like this used to be a really big domain. I'm not gonna open the map in the other book to show you. It used to be this really big domain, but now you can see the mists have kind of cut it up into 4 different parts, and each part has its own identity. Like if you wanted to have a kind of a Barovia-like, Eastern European, Central European, feel to it, you can, you can take, maybe this domain. You wanted a domain with kind of more folk horror, psychological horror, and maybe something with like kind of grandeur and elves and stuff. Okay, you know, there you go, Nocturnal Sea. You could even you can even run a bit of a sea campaign if you really wanted to, because there are ports and there are ships and stuff that ply these seas. How? Don't ask me. You know, it's the mists. I don't have to explain things. So you could do a lot of different campaigns in here. You could do a lot of different adventures, unlike some other domains. It's not, the individual sites in Darkon are not explained in a lot of detail, but that's okay because it lets you fill in the blanks. And because Darkon is such an iconic domain, there's a lot of available materials out there on all of these different sites. So you can easily find these and, you know, take them from older editions and just use them however you want. I think the thing, so I really like the feel of this domain. I really like how they changed it, but maybe the thing that I love the most about this domain is the GM tools. And I think this is maybe the domain with the best GM tools. And that is because it gives you the tools you need to create that grand campaign. So here's some adventures you can have in Darkon. Cool. But you can, so by taking these tables, for example, Darkon's Destruction or Azalin's Fate and Darkon's Salvation, right? So for example, you then decide, okay, how is Darkon going to be destroyed? Or why is it being destroyed? Oh, it's being consumed to fuel magic, funneling power from Castle Avernus into the King's Tier. Whoa, okay, crazy. You've got this giant floating crystal sun in the sky that is basically sucking all the power out of this domain. Cool, go to Castle Avernus and destroy this magical device to save Darkon. Azalin's Fate. What happened to Azalin? Maybe he really was destroyed, or maybe Azalin escaped into the past, and now there are multiple versions of him. You know, how cool is that? You know, and then, okay, what do you need to do to save Darkon? Maybe you need to free Darkon from the Shadowfell, because Ravenloft is kind of like trapped, is kind of like a demi-plane in Shadowfell. Long story. How do you save it? You know, what item are you going to need to save it? Maybe you need pieces of Azalin's shattered crown, or maybe you need the special device called the apparatus, which was, by the way, the important device in the second ever Ravenloft adventure, but we'll talk about that when we talk about Mordant. You know, who are going to be your allies? You know, which NPCs are going to be your allies? Who are going to be your rivals? You know, Dread and Darkon, like, what else is going to happen to your party? And finally, and this is amazing in my opinion, how is it all going to end? So there you have it. You can take these tables, roll, boom, you've got a campaign. Okay, and Darkon, you know, you can use very low CR monsters, or you could, you know, you might have some goblins, some skeletons, giant spiders and stuff running around, and all the way to liches and demi-liches and evil shadow dragons. There's a shadow dragon. There's a black shadow dragon that lives under a mountain. I forget which one, but there is one, you know. So you can go from, like, again, you can go take your party from level 1 and you can take it all the way to level 20, all in Darkon if you wanted to. And that is why it might be my favorite domain of all of the domains in Van Richten's Guide to Ravenloft. Thank you very much for watching. I know this video was quite long, but if you liked it, give me a thumbs up. Let me know in the comments what you liked, what you didn't like, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video when we cover the next 5 domains of Dread. Bye for now.